Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Double Down, the news and affairs programme that puts people first. It's Thursday, the 3rd of December 2020. We're broadcasting live from Dundalk and Dublin, and I am your host, Finbar Markey. We've got some interesting and quite relevant subjects to talk about this evening. We're joined by Brian Dougherty. Brian is a community worker and representative in what may be termed the unionist or pro-union community in and around Derry, and he's also a facilitator with the Northwest Community Partnership. We're going to talk to Brian tonight about working class politics in pro-union communities, about Brexit, about the concept of a united Ireland, and friction around the commemoration of 100 years of partition in Ireland. We're also joined by what I've come to term the Hemp family, Marcus McCabe and his wife Kate, who are hemp farmers and produce hemp building materials and CBD oil from their hemp farm in County Monaghan. We're going to ask the guys about various properties of hemp, the obstacles that they've faced in bringing hemp to the market, and maybe dispel one or two myths and rumours that are going around there about CBD and about hemp as a building material. Before we do that, I'd just like to remind you about a guest that we had on maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago. Now, Jackie Fox. And Jackie had forwarded and led a campaign over the last 3 years since her daughter, Nicole, or Coco, took her life because of online bullying. And Jackie had campaigned to have laws introduced to try to tackle online bullying. We had arranged for Jackie to come on just for a few minutes tonight to tell us some positive news about that campaign for Coco's Law. And Jackie sent me a text this afternoon at about 1 p.m. telling me that she had great news for our viewers. And I phoned her 20 minutes later, and it couldn't have been more of the opposite. She was in tears crying. She was devastated by some news that she had got within the few minutes of her sending that text to me. I have Jackie now on the show live. Jackie, are you there?
Yeah, hi, Finbar.
Jackie, I'll let you tell the viewers and your supporters what happened. What happened in that 20 minutes between 1 p.m. today and 20 past 1?
Okay, you're just going to have to bear with me because, as you said, I'm just so emotional.
Yeah, take your time.
Okay, on Tuesday, they brought Nicole's bill into stage 3, into the committee stage, and I got an email straight after that. After watching it live, I got an email saying the bill has passed the committee stage. It's passed stage 3, and the 4th stage is called a report and will take place next week in the Dáil. The bill will then go to the Seanad. It is still on target for the law to be passed by Christmas. I am pressing, as you have heard, to officially call the law Coco's Law. It will certainly be its name for practical purposes. I will let you know when the day and the time of the report stage is finalised. Regards and congratulations from Brendan Howland.
Of the Labour Party.
Yeah, and I was delighted with that because stage 3 is a very hard stage to get through, and things was on track, and that's the news I wanted to tell you because it was moving on so quickly now. And then when you rang me just in that space of 20 minutes or so, I had to find out on social media that I only found out today, and it was put up on Tuesday, that the Minister for Justice, Helen McEntee, said it was not possible to legalise or to legally change the title of the bill to Coco's Law in memory of Nicole. Brendan Howland has said he's disgusted with this. He doesn't want to call it the harassment, harmful communication related bill. He wants to officially call it Coco's Law. And now the minister has said that she had been given legal advice and said that the bill could not be changed and Coco's Law will not be in the title, whether it's Coco's Law or the original harmful harassment communication bill, also known as Coco's Law. And
but
now,
Jack, you were led to believe from day one, and I think when it comes to the public knowing about this law at all, It comes down to you, and it comes down to Nicole in heaven or wherever she is now. And for 3 years, you were wheeled out by the politicians of every colour and every creed. And that you were committed, and they committed publicly time and again that this was going to be called Coco's Law. What has happened?
Oh, 100%. Even when they were talking about it in the doll, they never said the harmful harassment or the harassment, harmful communication. They always called it as Coco's Law, and up until the 4th of November, it was still called Coco's Law. And what happened was, Helen McEntee decided not to call it Coco's Law. And the reason being, she has said that she got legal advice, that the legal advice people said that, you know, they advised her not to call it Coco's Law. But I was personally chatting to Brendan Howland, and that is not the case. They advised her, but she doesn't have to take that advice. And on the 15th of December, that's Tuesday week, they're going to go into the 4th stage of the doll, and Brendan Howland is going to call for a vote on calling it Coco's Law. Now, even if everyone in that room votes for Coco's Law, she can still say no, and it goes by what she wants.
Yeah.
I asked Brendan why. What reason is she given that she doesn't want to call it Coco's Law, or doesn't want to call it even the harmful harassment communication, also known as Coco's Law? What reason has she got not to put Coco in the title? And he said, because there's no law in Ireland named after a person, and that's the only reason why she's not calling it. Where, you know, if she was anyway decent or had a heart, why she should be the first person to want to call someone that, you know, that died through suicide, and that's a personal thing for her as well. You know, there's no reason. I've been told to email to send a video to Helen McEntee and ask her and tell her how I feel, but also for everyone, for the thousands of people that has supported and followed Coco's Law, to email her and try and get her to reverse the decisions. I go into schools and colleges every 3, 4, 5 times a week and teaching them about what Coco's Law is and the effects what cyberbullying has, and, you know, what Coco's Law is going to mean. And that's all what people know. They don't know as the harassment, harmful communication related bill. You know, they know it as Coco's Law. And even for Brendan Howland, he doesn't even want it to be called the harassment. He wants it to be officially called Coco's Law. And the only person that can do that is Helen McEntee, and everyone else is not opposing to it. Everyone else is agreeing to it. And, you know, there's not one person opposing this, not even the legal the attorney office that they said, they're not even opposing to it. The only one opposing to it is Helen McEntee, and she has the power to just say those words. Yes, you can do it. You can call
there's
it.
something, Jackie, as well, about, in case there's any viewers watching thinking, okay, well, the law's been introduced, and we may not get the name we want, but we're getting the law. It's not just about an emotional thing about Coco. There's 2 very important reasons why it should be called Coco's Law. The first reason is essentially that this is what it was sold to by the politicians. They didn't come out and talk to the public about a big, long, conglomerated name and complexities of law. They told the Nicole story, and that's how this was. And this was sped through the doll. Now, one reason why they may not want to call it Coco's Law is because the spirit of the law is about the bullying of children and young people online. That's why this law has according to the politicians and the media, this is why this law has been brought in. But if this law was going to be abused by other people, and the question came up, it was ambiguous in a courtroom, and the question came up about, well, why was the law introduced in the first place? And if it's called Coco Law, then the spirit of the law will be clear. It's about online bullying of young people and driving people to suicide. But if it's called some big, long, ambiguous name, then you could claim that this law was about anything into the future. And so personally, when I heard, I was really annoyed this morning. I was so upset to have to listen to you. I'm upset for you to have to listen to you crying and so devastated. And actually finding this out online on Facebook, and not one politician have been by your side the whole time, not one of them having the manners to phone you up to tell you this change of news for you. So you've started a campaign now. You want people to contact Helen McEntee to send emails, but you also want those emails to be polite. Isn't that right, Jack?
Yeah.
You don't want abusive or...
No, that's not going to get anyone anywhere. I've been graceful and respectful all the way up through this, and I haven't, I've done everything by the book. I've done everything, and I haven't been disrespectful once. And I know, this isn't a hate campaign now against Helen McEntee. It's to get into her heart, to let her know what it's what it means to us, that everyone knows it's Coco's Law. It's not a hate thing. So people emailing her, just do it with respect. I'm also going to send her a personal video to her as well, and I'm going to do you know what, Finbar, the only thing that kept me going, that kept me alive, was two things. One, because I wanted to bring a law in so this wouldn't happen to anyone else, and no other parent has to go through the heartache. But two, I had to be called named after Coco for her legacy. It doesn't come with one thing. I had to be two, and that's what kept me going. That's what kept me here, to survive and to find out that she's taken that away. She's taken her legacy away from me. It's just
not over. It's not over yet, Jackie. You have hundreds of thousands of people around this country whose hearts you have touched over the last 3 years, and especially in the last year. This is far from over. I've just been, Stephen McDowell, our studio guy here in Dundalk, has just given me Helen McEntee's email address. So it's, if any of our viewers are there, remember, we want polite but detailed and explanatory emails about why this should be called Coco's Law. Can you imagine having to explain to young people a big, long, convoluted law and then title of law, instead of just being able to say Coco's Law and telling Coco's story? Isn't that how you get young people to be able to link in and understand law and the reasons for law? Helen McEntee is Helen, Helen .McEntee, MCENTEE, at Oireachtas, OIREACHTAS.IE. So that's Helen.McEntee at Oireachtas.IE. Can you share this interview with Jackie around the country over the next few days as much as you can? In the meantime, I believe, Jackie, you're setting up a team to drive this next stage of the campaign to make sure that Helen McEntee changes her mind.
Yeah, March for Justice Ireland, who has been amazing all the way through, helping me anyway. Yeah, if we have to take to the streets again, we have a meeting in the morning. I want to get every media that's behind me anyway, do you know what I mean, have been behind me all the way. I want to get the media involved. I want to get everyone that has said to me, anything I can do, anything I can help you with, I need your help now. And the only thing is, I've only 10 days to do this. They left it at the last hurdle. Everything was going grand until Helen McEntee said no, and I've only 10 days to turn this around. So it's going to be a fight and a half. But I've fantastic people behind me that I know, we're going to do our best to do this. But she's going to destroy me if she doesn't change her mind.
Yeah, well, listen, we're going to be right, not behind you, we're going to be right beside you on this as much as we can. I want to have you back on next week for a much longer chat when we get more information about how we can progress this as much as possible. Once again, for anybody viewing out there, Helen.McEntee at Oireachtas.ie. Polite but explanatory emails, please, and just don't send one. If you need to send one a day, send one a day, but can't and this is in memory of Nicole, but it's far more than that. there is a danger that the spirit of this new legislation is going to be lost if it's not called Coco's Law. Jackie, I don't mean to cut you off. We have a few other guests waiting. We'll have you on next week. I'm going to be talking to you myself over the next day or so to see how we can help you further with this. And I know it was really, really tough for you to come on this evening on the show. I just want to thank you once again for doing that.
And thank you, Finbar, for supporting me, and as usual, and being behind me. Thank you.
All the time, Jackie, all the time. Listen, we'll speak to you soon, Jackie, and I'll give you a call in the morning.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay,
bye-bye.
bye, guys.
That was Jackie Fox, folks. We were hoping, as I said, to bring you some really positive news. That hasn't worked out, but hopefully in a week or two, we will be changing that story. Okay, I'm joined now by Brian Dougherty, from the Northwest Cultural Partnership. About 4 or 5 weeks ago, we had Republican councillors from in and around Northern Ireland, but especially from the Derry area, who were talking to us about their experience of being independent Republican representatives in working class communities and some of the most economically deprived parts of the UK, as it was described at the time. We spoke about the ideas of a united Ireland, about Brexit, things like that. And we also spoke about some talks that were going on between their peers in the pro-union or the unionist community. And we were very interested in having at least 1 or 2 representatives on over the next few weeks to be able to represent all sides in discussions like that and to have some parity and fair play. And so we have Brian on to discuss representing what is a minority community in and around the Derry area, and to talk about the Northwest Cultural Project and things like that. Brian, thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Finbar.
Before we start, what is the Northwest Cultural Partnership?
It's basically a community organisation that uses pro-union culture as I suppose, a vehicle for community development. I mean, as you indicated there just now, I mean, the loyalist community, the unionist community in Londonderry is very much seen as a peripheral community, not only peripheral in terms of Derry, but in terms of its geographical location, I suppose, to Belfast, to Dublin, to Westminster, and to Europe. So the unionist community here in the city have always felt, I suppose, slightly isolated in terms of where they see themselves in that geographical context, the city context, and also the national context. So what we have kind of been doing for a number of years now, I mean, I've been a community worker, I've lived in Derry all my life. I've been a community worker here for 20 years, and we have a really poor political leadership here, elected political leadership, and you know it's taken us quite a while as that minority community to look at alternative forms of leadership and alternative ways of trying to improve our own local communities. And I suppose a penny dropped with us maybe 5-10 years ago, whenever there was one of the American envoys, Dr. Haas, came over during one of the many kind of stalemates in terms of the peace process, and had identified 2 or 3 issues around what was the block he saw as the block to peace building or cementing peace in Northern Ireland. And he actually mentioned parading as one of those stumbling blocks, which actually got our backs up a bit, because I mean, we as I suppose a group of community workers in Derry saw parading, or the structures around parading, as a potential kind of solution to cementing peace, because what we've realised for quite a while is that if you want to reach the most, if you want to get access to most hard to reach, marginalised, isolated and vulnerable young people in particular, then you use the structures there that those young people are interested in. And the marching band structure, the loyalist band structure, is very much part of that. We set up a Londonderry Bands Forum at that time, which coordinated I suppose the bands in the city. There's 14 bands, loyalist bands in Derry, which really represent the 14 estates in Derry that are seen as those most socially, economically deprived. And by going into those and working with those bands, we were able to get access to those young people very readily. I mean, we recognised that, you know, that the band leaders in those areas were the real people with credibility, the real politicians, the real youth workers, the real community development workers. And under them, you had maybe 50 or 60 young people who who were under their, I suppose, their structure. And these are young people who maybe 15, 20, 30 years ago would have been attracted to paramilitary activity. They now see that loyalist marching culture as part of their, I suppose, a safer way of expressing that identity. So I suppose the cultural partnership is looking at how we kind of use that the culture that young people are involved in to influence them in a progressive way. The Bands Forum was a key element of that initially, but it's expanded in the last 2 or 3 years to look at various forms of pro-union culture. We deal with Ulster Scots language and drama and poetry. We have a School of Highland Dance as well. We have a production company that looks at plays, and we also have a Bob Hart Memorial Trust, which is a historical company which looks at the historical context of Northern Ireland and within the island of Ireland. So we're engaged in not only, I suppose, in performance and drama, but we also engage in quite a bit of political debate as well. We've also kind of expanded our role to look at broader civic issues in Derry. We've become that kind of voice of civic unionism, the voice of people who feel that our elected reps, be they through the DUP or Ulster Unionist Party, are letting us down.
There is a traditional stereotype of the unionist community that they're very conservative, neo-religious, bigoted right-wing. That's the image that traditionally has come over with regards to the unionist community. Have you come across that stereotype yourself? And is there any truth to it? Or, so for instance, you would never associate left-wing politics, for instance, as an example, with unionism. It would always be conservative, associated with the Tories and things like that. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a stereotype that's been labelled, I've been labelled with, and many of my peers and colleagues and friends have been labelled with for a number of years. And to me, it goes back really to that narrative that's been portrayed of the unionist people by kind of mainstream media, but also by academia and of course, political opportunists. The reality is much more nuanced than that. I mean, I'm very much a pro-unionist, but I also would see myself pretty much as a socialist as well. And obviously, when you look at I suppose, the political leadership we have, it's very difficult to see how those two can merge or marry. And sometimes, we get frustrated, or the general Protestant community get frustrated as how they're portrayed, and a lot of it's our own fault as well because of the political leadership we have. That tends to kind of play to that right-wing narrative. But I mean, if you look at one example is the current debate around Brexit at the moment. I mean, even within our organisation, and we would see ourselves as maybe centre right or centre left. It's about a 50-50 split in terms of who voted to leave Brexit and who voted to remain, and you'll see that reflected right across the spectrum within the Protestant community here in Derry, even within families and within households. So it's a lot more kind of nuanced than people are led to believe. And a lot of it, I suppose, comes from, the perception people have of the DUP and the Free Presbyterian movement, that church movement, and that, is quite an antiquated perception. Now, it may have been, I suppose, more prevalent in the 70s and 80s, and particularly around the Reverend Ian Paisley times. But certainly now you'll see a lot more kind of levels of thinking within unionism and a lot more progressive thinking. It doesn't help as well, in the north here, people like to label themselves in a binary term. It's almost a case of, well, nationalists support Palestine, so we have to support Israel. People hated Trump, but apparently the Protestants loved him. And it was quite easy for people to categorize unionism within that kind of bad guy box, and because it made it easier for, I suppose, the mainstream media to kind of sell that narrative and that story. The political parties up here, of course, loved that because we were then painted as the nationalist parties loved that because we were painted as the bad guys, and then of course through academia here as well, we're kind of categorized as that right wing kind of Little Englander kind of role, and believe me, it's very different on the ground from that.
Yeah, there was you mentioned earlier, and I think there was an inference in it that there's a difficulty in people who are not in the big parties in your area from being able to get into the political local framework. You're looking for other frameworks to try to do your work. We did speak to independent Republican councillor Gary. Off the top of my head now. A few weeks ago, and Gary Donnelly, and Gary was saying that when they tried to be independent Republicans in the Sinn Féin dominated heartlands, they found it very difficult. They met a lot of obstacles in doing that, and at times I'm not saying you did, but at times they felt quite intimidated by the political environment that were trying to stop them from having an independent voice. Have you had any experiences where, like, I've done some research on you, and you're well respected in your area, and yet you don't seem to be going into the local end of politics. You seem to be using a different framework to work with the community. Why is that?
A couple of reasons. I mean, it's interesting what you say about Gary, because I actually think Gary's a very, very effective independent councillor, and in many respects leads the SDLP and Sinn Féin by the nose in many aspects. But there's a slightly different, I suppose, situation with ourselves, because there isn't that market for an independent unionist councillor within the Derry area, because we're a minority community. It's, you know, we're kind of, it's been labelled at us that we could maybe split the vote and there might be a unionist seat lost. So we don't have that kind of leeway in terms of kind of mass voting support that would allow us to stand as independents. We have considered it, you know, and it may be something that'll happen down the line. But at the moment, and I can honestly say this, I mean, I've been involved in community work now for 30 years, and because of the I suppose, community makeup and the political makeup in Northern Ireland here, you really can make a greater difference if you retain that sense of independence or that sense of apoliticalness. Because if I tomorrow stood for the DUP, I would straight away be labelled, a bit like we were talking about earlier on, be labelled as that right-wing religious fanatic, and that would close so many doors for me in terms of the work I'm doing, because I've always found, I suppose, the people in Derry to be quite open and accommodating in terms of trying to support the work that I'm doing and the work that my colleagues are doing, and that door would immediately close if I was labelled as a DUP supporter. So I've
ran as an independent, other than splitting the vote.
Yeah,
you'd probably win. What's stopping you at the moment? Is there anything else other than the splitting the vote stopping you?
Well, I say, but apart from that sense that it may close doors for us in terms of being able to do the progressive work, you know, the groundbreaking work that we do. I mean, there's also, I mean, there is, it's strange here because, I mean, the power base, I suppose, we have a huge constituent base in the Derry Strabane Council area. Along with the bands, we work in many communities. We work with bonfire groups, we work with young people who could be responsible for putting up murals and flags. So we actually have a very credible voice anyway. And we, as a result of that powerful voice allows us to hold our elected representatives more to account now. So for years, decades in Derry, they've been getting away with being completely inadequate or ineffectual to meet our needs. I mean, if you drove around Derry tomorrow and in loyalist areas, you'll see play parks, you'll see community centres, you'll see sporting facilities, and every single one of those, that community infrastructure was developed by the community sector and within those areas. So the community voice within loyalism has become very, very powerful anyway, because it's been the only effectual voice that there's been. So it's at a point where we have assessed it ourselves. You know, would we gain anything from standing in the council elections? Would we gain anything in the assembly? And at the moment, I don't think we necessarily would. Down the line, we may. But at the moment, we don't see any real benefit on that, because we have those discussions. We do send our delegations to Stormont. We send them to council. We influence policy. We contribute to policy, and we've been proven to be quite effective at doing that anyway at this stage.
So it's a different style and type of politics, probably more on your playing field rather than theirs, if you want to put it that way.
We set our agenda. We're not tied by DUP party politics. As I say, as I indicated earlier on, the loyalist psyche, generally in Northern Ireland, I would say not just ourselves, is a lot more nuanced than the narrative would allow people to believe. But once you go into that box of being a DUP or Ulster Unionist, because that's really the only alternatives there are, then you're immediately, you have to toe a party line, and it's a party line. I mean, there's many things within those political parties that I disagree with, and I could never see myself being restricted by that. And that's where I feel a certain degree of jealousy with the level of autonomy that the likes of Gary Donnelly and Paul Gallagher and others have, because they can express their views and they have a strong base behind them, and can rattle whatever cage they have, because as you're well aware, I mean, a lot of the conflict within Derry at the moment isn't between loyalism and nationalism, it's within elements of republicanism, and that's, you know, where that main fight is happening at the moment.
Yeah. You mentioned Brexit earlier. Brexit has opened up the doors to discussions of subject matter that may have not been discussed otherwise. There's been some talks going on between yourselves and people like Councillor Donnelly to a degree. Can you maybe enlighten us a little bit about what those talks are about, where they might be going, if they're going anywhere? And the main subject area that I've seen coming from talks about Brexit in Northern Ireland is this idea that we may be stepping closer, if not very slowly, towards some kind of a united Ireland. These discussions, I presume, have come up in the discussions and debates that you have had. Have you anything that you'd like to enlighten us about those discussions, or what people's opinions are in the loyalist or the pro-union communities?
Yeah, I mean, we have, as indicated earlier on, I mean, as well as I suppose the mainstream community work we do like to kind of stretch boundaries and put our head above the parapet when we can. I mean, for example, we were the first. I was the first unionist leader to invite President McAleese to a loyalist area in Derry in 2001, and got threatened by loyalist paramilitaries as a result. Since that, we've played at the Flag Huel at a time whenever it was insane at the thought in 2013 that loyalist bands would play at effectively a traditionally Irish music festival. We've spoken to Sinn Féin our days. We've developed a Maiden City Accord looking at parading. We've really challenged our own community, I suppose, in terms of where they see themselves and how they should be presenting themselves and how they should be thinking going forward. So we've always taken those risks, and we've always been engaging in those hard, contentious discussions and uncomfortable discussions within loyalism. And obviously, I mean, we don't hide behind the fact that, you know, we're part of the union, and you know, that we're going to bury our head in the sand and say, well, to hell with them, you know, that this is what we are, and you know, that if they don't like it, they can lump it. We know that these discussions are happening, and society's changing within Northern Ireland as well. So we've always had those discussions. We've had them for a number of years. So it was never an issue for myself personally, and for my colleagues to be approaching Gary Donnelly and Paul Gallagher and other independent representatives in the Derry Strabane Council area, because what we've always found whenever we've approached people with different political views is the first thing we look for is we treat everyone on face value and on their merits. We know that people's political opinions can change, but what we look for in a person is whether they're trustworthy and whether they're genuine. And what we've always found, particularly with Gary and Paul, is that they are genuine. There's huge things we disagree on, you know, but we know that at least what we see is what we get, and you don't always get that with some of the political representation we have in Derry. So, like, I mean, I suppose one kind of key, crucial example was 2 years ago. I'm a board member of Institute Football Club, who are a Premiership club in plays in the Irish League here in the north, and our ground was flooded in 2017 at Drumahoe, and the same year we were promoted to the Premiership, and we had nowhere to stay or nowhere to play. And we weren't going to be allowed to compete in the Premiership unless we found a ground. And the only club that came forward was Glentoran in Belfast, which was unfeasible. We went to the Brandywell, as you know, which is in the heart of the bog side in Derry, and said to council, can we play here? Their first reaction was no way. The police said no way. It wouldn't be safe to bring particularly Protestant fans from the likes of Linfield and Glentoran and Ballymena and Coleraine to the Brandywell. The last time that happened, you know, Derry said they were kicked out of the league. So they said no, it wasn't going to happen. So what we had to do was we had to persuade them that we could manage those games ourselves, because the police aren't allowed into the bog side, which is another thing. So we got together with the political representation from the nationalist community in that area, and Gary was at the forefront of that, and we talked about how we could collectively ensure that the matches could happen, that the fans could travel in, the buses could travel in and out, and there'd be no bother. And we went and persuaded the police ourselves that that could happen. And for a full season, myself and Gary, prior to every home match, were out. And well, before that, Gary introduced me to a lot of the local residents in the Bogside, people who live beside the stadium, and to kind of reassure them, that we're going to do what we could to make sure there wasn't any crowd trouble, that there weren't going to be fans turning up in the Bogside with Union Jacks, that we were going to manage this thing properly and just play football. And that groundwork was really, really important. And match day, we walked around the stadium, escorting the buses in, escorting the buses out, and it worked incredibly effectively in terms of allowing it to happen. And for a season and a half before COVID, there wasn't one single incident at a football match at the Brandywell, not one incident at all, which is incredible for any football match, never mind a football match where you have loyalist clubs coming to play in effectively a nationalist area. Plus, we had our own supporters as well, coming from the Waterside, which is a largely Protestant support base, who were able to come in and out of the stadium as well. And that only happened because we were on the ground doing that work. And Gary was instrumental in doing that in terms of providing those contacts, but also then speaking to groups of young people who may have had it on their mind to stow on the bus on the way past. So that kind of introduced ourselves, I suppose, personally to Gary and that. And but since that, we got talking before matches. Gary became a bit of an institute supporter, so we were chatting during matches, which was quite often a lot more interesting than watching the game. And we started to build up a trust there, a social capital it's called, and so that network has been happening, and those discussions then have expanded into other elements of politics and issues that are happening on the ground. So not only is
but there are challenges as well, Brian. There was Gary Donnelly put down a motion to Derry Council not to commemorate the 100 years of partition of Ireland. That motion was passed initially in the council. I know they're saying they're going to go back and look at it again. How did you take that? I think when I spoke to you doing research for the programme, you actually said you were more surprised by Sinn Féin and the SDLP than you were by Gary Donnelly's motion itself. Could you maybe explain that for us?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my first reaction was, geez, Gary, you're a wild man. This is like, but it goes back to the case of, we weren't surprised. We would have actually been surprised if Gary hadn't come out and supported, or had come out and supported it, but so it was like, and as I said earlier on, I mean, we were angry. I mean, we weren't bothered up in any respect, but as I say, with Gary and independent councillors he supported, as I say, we know what we're getting with Gary, and we far prefer that openness and honesty. What we don't like is people pretending they're something they're not, because I mean, for years in Derry, particularly, the council have promoted itself as some form of progressive council area, where the Troubles finished first. This is where we developed civil rights. This is the home of John Hume and Martin McGuinness, and we're a model of good practice. And to us, we thought that was nonsense anyway, and this kind of showed it. And so we were saying to them, how can you talk about being progressive and forward thinking whenever you're basically sticking two fingers up to a significant minority of people in the pro-union community in your city. I mean, in the same nights, there was motions put forward to invite Biden to Derry as long as he denounced Israel. There was Gary put forward another motion around Cuba. The council is always doing this, about supporting Palestine, about supporting refugees, about supporting Black Lives Matter. But to us, it was like, okay, you're welcome in the city as long as you're not a prod, and what we were trying to put across to him was, it wasn't, I mean, we were never going to be triumphalist next year in terms of centenary, because we know, of course, that people don't see it, at least half the population in Northern Ireland don't see it as a celebration, they see it as a funeral, but we like to see ourselves as being a bit more broad-minded and progressive in that, and we see next year as an opportunity to not only to celebrate what we see as the good parts of Ireland, North and South and the UK, but also to initiate those discussions we talked about around the shared Ireland and All Ireland debate. So that to us, that's maybe an opportunity lost, but the argument that kind of came through was that, it was really about the pros and cons of partition, which it was never about. Well, also to us it was a case of council sticking two fingers up to the unionist community in Derry and saying, get back in your box. You're welcome in the city. You can have your parade once a year, but don't get above yourselves. And that to me, I found really, really disappointing, because it also, within our own community, gave credence and fuel for the naysayers who for years have been telling us, why are you working with that lot? They're just wolves and sheep's clothing, and they were rubbing their hands and saying, we told you so. So it left us vulnerable and exposed as well. But generally, it's left us in a situation where we're now doubting whether this work we've been doing over the years has really been genuine, or whether it was just really a show. So there's a bit of work to be done to address that and start building that trust again.
I had a couple more questions, but we're running out of time. I briefly asked you this question before I close off with a final question. Amidst all the talks about a united Ireland, I was telling you while we were doing research for the show that years ago I worked in Nambarry Tea Factory up just by the Albert Clock in Belfast, and there was a load of lads there from nationalist communities, and I foolishly, I was only 21 or 2, piped up with a conversation about a united Ireland. And they looked at me as if I had two heads, and they said, what are you talking about, a united Ireland? We want an independent, sovereign Northern Ireland or Ulster, or they all had different phrases for it. Has it ever come up in conversation, the idea that, something, lads, we might be better off on our own here, rowing our boat together than being connected either to London or Dublin? Has that ever, I know in the 80s, early 80s, that was discussed in a programme called Air and Nua, and it was discussed with representatives from the unionist community. Has it ever come up, and what do you think about that idea?
Yeah, there was a prominent community worker here years ago. He sadly died now, Glenn Barr. He was a big advocate of an independent Ulster, as he called it. I mean, to me, it's completely aspirational. I personally don't see any merit in it. I mean, for the same reasons or for the same rationale that we use in terms of staying part of the UK. I mean, and I know it seems a bit bland, but the economic argument really is key to that whole discussion as far as we're concerned. And I can't see how a country of 1.5 million that has no real, I suppose, output in terms of GDP could survive on its own. Plus, it's not really satisfying anyone. I think that the general consensus is that people either want to be part of the UK or want to be part of United Ireland. Within Northern Ireland itself, though, I mean, there's a huge debate around kind of diversity of identity. I mean, I would see myself as Northern Irish first and foremost, as opposed to, I suppose, British or Irish. I also kind of can term myself as being Irish as well, because I'm a member of the Irish Cricket Board, which is an all-Ireland body. My nephew played cricket for Ireland. One of the proudest moments in my life was him standing to the Irish national anthem with a shamrock on his jumper. I support the Irish rugby team. So I mean, I don't think we should be kind of defined anyway by kind of narrowing our sense of identity down. I just think that the sovereign state of Northern Ireland, I think, is just it's just a wee bit too aspirational, and why do we really need that conversation?
Okay.
It's highly unfeasible.
Okay, and just finally, Brian, post-COVID, post-Brexit, post, what's your hopes for your own community in Derry and for the bigger picture in Northern Ireland and Ireland?
Very much the same as what you'd heard from Gary and independent Republican councillors, because if you strip away our desire for our political futures, as our problems within our loyalist states are very similar to what you'll get in the Bogside. I mean, we need to dispel this myth that for some reason, when the civil rights movement started in the 70s, that the Prods were better off than the Catholics. They weren't. We lived in similar conditions, and that's the same now. If you go into Tullyalley or new buildings, you'll see the same levels of deprivation there. You'll see the same problems. Young people want jobs. They want hope. They want a future. To me, that's the real crux of Brexit. How it might impact on the economy, because it's not rocket science. It doesn't matter what your political views are. If you give a young person a job, a mortgage, responsibility, he'll soon stop throwing stones at his Catholic neighbour, and we'll get back into and to, you know, a proper life. It'll stop young people from having to emigrate. It's not just young Catholics that emigrate from Ireland, it's young Protestants as well. There's a huge brain drain of or young students heading to the mainland and further afield to study and not coming back. You know, so to me, the economic, I don't see any kind of physical, I don't see any kind of threat of return to violence because of Brexit. I see the economic impact being the real worry. And then, of course, you throw COVID into that mix. It's scary to think what, you know, the implications are going to be in terms of the little employment we have, because we didn't see a peace dividend. We didn't really. I mean, we've been heavily subsidized by Britain. We've been heavily subsidized by Europe. We've been heavily subsidized by America. You know, we need to start to stand on our own 2 feet. And with a combination of COVID and Brexit, that's going to be very, very difficult. So, I mean, it's scary what the future holds. But I think that if you go into Craig and Bogside, you'll get the exact same fears there.
Okay, so your hopes really are around improvements in socio-economic conditions for the people in your communities, irrespective of their creed or colour or anything else.
Absolutely, and collectively, myself and Gary and others, you know, I've done that. I mean, Gary's helped young people or people from the Protestant community. We've been doing the same in nationalist areas. We work in cross-community programs as well. It's all about giving young people the best possible chance, the best qualifications, and the best opportunity for decent long-term employment.
Brian, we're out of time. I really appreciate you coming on. I was looking forward to the last few weeks to have you on. I'd like to have you and maybe some colleagues on again to talk about things in a deeper fashion into the future, especially as who knows what's going to happen with this. But I don't think anybody knows what's happening with Brexit at the moment. Brian, have a nice evening. I'll give you a buzz tomorrow just for some feedback, and we'll speak to you over the next few weeks, hopefully.
Okay, thank you, Finbar.
Night, Brian. Thank you.
Yeah, bye.
Finally tonight, we're joined by Marcus McCabe and Kate Mullaney. They are hemp farmers in County Monaghan. They are living, some people would say, their life. Thanks for joining us, guys. Can you take your mute off there? Do you have mute on?
No.
Hey. Oh, I'd say that's a lot better. That's a lot better. Guys, I visited your farm over the years a couple of times. I was very impressed. I don't want to describe it. Your house, everything's built from hemp. Tell us about it.
Well, actually, the house isn't built of hemp. It's built out of straw.
Oh, even better.
Yeah. We started. It's over 30 years, I think, since we started. We were interested in. We're kind of refugees from Clonus. Had, like many young people of our time, went off to the city, and then you're thinking, is this really where I want to spend the rest of my life? And just always interested in the land and how we maintain ourselves, how we live. So met Kate, and we did a permaculture course in 1990, and permaculture, I had been involved, campaigning on green issues and Earthwatch and Friends of the Earth, and they were kind of like the movements at the time, but very much focused on the negative and, the problems and all the serious things were going on with the environment. And literally a book fell off the shelf into my hand, Permaculture, which is all about solutions. So it's actually the solutions to our problems and how we design and create sustainable systems, basically.
So your lifestyle, so you've raised, I think it's 2 kids in the house, you live in the house yourselves, your lifestyle is uber green, even to the extent of toileting, which was quite novel for me to use your toilet at one time. But at some point in this journey, you guys came across hemp. Tell us about that, can you? What is hemp? Why did you get into it?
Okay, so we were already working with green building materials and building with straw, using earth plasters, thatch, green wood, and at the end of the day, in the broader world, let's say, you want more reliable solutions. Like, not everybody's going to want to build a straw bale house. So hemp is a material which, when combined with lime, and we're actually in my brother's hemp office here at the moment, where we have decent broadband. But the material can be cast into walls, into the floor, into the roof. You can create an entire envelope of hemp around your building, basically. And you've got a breathable material, you've got a warm material, and you're also locking carbon into the walls. And it's also something that grows out of the land as well, and grows in a very short space of time, in 3 or 4 months.
Yeah, and it grows to quite a height. It's a tall enough plant, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you can literally get up to 3 and 4 meters from some of the big fiber crops.
It's one of the oldest used plants known, used for plants for a multitude of purposes.
Absolutely, yeah. Hemp. The original 2 crops would have been oats and hemp, the earliest of man's crops. So it goes way back. Our history goes way back to the very beginning with hemp. It has a very strong natural fiber. So that allows for all sorts of making cords and string. Would have been really important in the ancient world. All shipping and all that would have been very reliant on hemp for sailcloth, for the rope, for the caulking. And then not only that, the fiber then, but there's also a seed that comes like a grain, very high protein, and it's very rich in omega-3. In fact, a whole profile of good fats, proteins. And then, of course, the leaves also contain cannabinoids as well. And we have an endocannabinoid system. Human beings, we all have the same chemistry, basically.
As the plant.
As the plant.
Okay. Yeah. In case anyone thinks I'm ignoring Kate, when we get into a bit of a more complex and legal conversation in a few minutes, Kate's the brains of the operation. So Marcus told me earlier, I'm not insulting you, insulted yourself, Marcus, there. But don't think that we're ignoring Kate at all. We're not. You produce building materials, but you also produce what has become a major, almost a fashion trend at this stage, CBD oil, which is a cannabinoid-based oil. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, okay. So actually we started with an actual expression from the juice, actually, of the hemp plant, as opposed to the oil. We've only just launched the oil, really, in the last month, you could say. But for the last 7 years, we've been pressing the hemp tops, the flowers and the leaves, through mechanical juicers to press out the contents of the plant itself, and using it as a vegetable food. And, everybody talks about full spectrum, but there's nothing broader than the actual full juice of the plant. So we've been doing that for the last 7 years. Prior to that, we were doing building materials, but that's a tough game, actually, unless you're involved in a big project. So the juice was to try and kind of raise us out of the ashes, and in fact, it has. The juice is an amazing way of consuming the plant. And we also make a powder, like a dried powder from that juice as well. So like just for instance, you've got 36% protein in the powder, in the juice powder, 30% fat. So like really serious food. And then as well as all the terpenes, all the other plant biochemicals there as well. So really special, strong food.
And you used to, if you were to purchase that off you guys up until recently anyway, it used to come in almost little frozen squares that you'd put one into a drink a day, you let it melt and you drink it, and that was your intake of all that goodness for that day. You've moved away from that process now, or are you doing the juice and the oils?
No, we're absolutely, no, we'll never not do the juice. I mean, it's where we started. So, and in fact, I think it is our best product. So, and it's also the best value as well for people, just so that they know you get the most for the least cost to you. The juice is amazing. So yeah, it's there. Unfortunately, very difficult to post during COVID now, so people actually have to come and collect it. But someday we'll have it out there in the shops where you can actually go and buy it, and not too far away.
Yeah, and I actually a couple of years ago I saw the impact of drinking the juice on a number of older people, one that was particularly ill, and it had a significant positive impact on that person. Unfortunately, a lot of people of late have been afraid to maybe look into hemp further because of its association with its psychoactive relative, the direct cannabis plant. Do you want to talk about the connection between psychoactive cannabis and hemp? And maybe we'll elaborate then on the difficulty that has brought in terms of bringing it to the market.
Yeah.
Well,
you go ahead. Yeah.
Maybe that's my chance.
Hiya, Kate. This is your chance to come in.
I suppose just to go back a little while, when we begun, we were growing in Northern Ireland. In fact, we were growing in Derry. This is almost 20 years ago. We at the time we were processing both from Northern Ireland and the Republic, and the Control of Drugs Act was what controlled. We had to get a license, so it was a very controlled crop. And up to that time and up to now, it has remained the same. So we still have to get a license to grow this crop. Like any other farmer, any other grain farmer does not need a license to grow wheat or barley or whatever. It's all free. But then in 2016, at that time, we got a grant from Enterprise Ireland. We won the CSF fund. And we were, in fact, in the wonderful position of educating Enterprise Ireland about CBD.
CBD. They didn't actually know what it was at that point.
They hadn't heard about it. And as time went on, things became, because the reason why I'm just giving you some background is because things actually became more difficult. Rather than opening up, they became more difficult for us or for any hemp business. In 2018, hemp, I have to remind you that hemp is actually a food and has been, and always has been since the foundation of the EU, since the Treaty of the Foundation of the EU was written. Hemp was written in as a food. So anything below 0.2% THC is considered a food in Europe.
And THC would be a psychoactive ingredient in cannabis.
Yes, but hemp isn't cannabis.
Yeah.
It's like it's a tiny constituent or molecule within the plant. It's tiny. It's naturally there. It's not irrelevant, but it's not
significant.
It would not have a psychological impact that would be noticeable
at that level. And what happened then after 2016, actually in 2018. Government agencies began to refer to, and this is what's added to the confusion, the government agencies and the media began to refer to hemp as cannabis and as a drug, whereas all the while it was and still is and remains a food. So this became more and more difficult for hemp businesses, because at that point then the guards began to raid businesses, farms, and homes, people's homes, and
for consuming hemp products.
Yeah, for hemp, and this raised the profile, or actually had the opposite effect. Really, damaged the profile of hemp and damaged the profile of the industry, because there was a question over whether or not there was something wrong happening. And of course, when the guards are involved, people automatically think that something wrong is going on. Whereas all the while it was hemp. And that time scale between 2018 got more and more intense for hemp farmers, to the point where in 2020, this year, in February 2020, the FSAI released a report that was damning for the industry, actually. And there were many products. The day before the report was released, products were safe on the shelves, and the day after the report, products were no longer safe, and they were removed from the shelves because of the actions that the FSAI took as a result of their survey and as a result of their report. The survey, or the actions that they took at that time, were based on a very flawed study, a study that had a scientific study that had no references. Imagine basing a report on a study that had no scientific references. Yeah, it's a crazy thing to do. But nonetheless, so products at the time were removed from the shelves. But actually what was more damaging, I mean, and that was very damaging for those businesses that were involved. And some of those businesses have left the country and haven't come back. But what actually was more damaging was some of the products that were left on the shelves. Because actually what happened was products that were
mislabeled,
misleading in their labeling were left on the shelves. And this was grossly unfair.
What do you mean by misleading, Kate?
Well, there's products that haven't got what they're saying in the label. The study didn't pick up on that. Well, even though it had the report didn't pick up on that, even though they had studied the cannabinoids within these products, ones that didn't come as being anywhere close to what they were suggesting was on their label, so that the CBD was not as evident, it wasn't being picked up in the analysis, yet products that had small amounts of THC that was legal, it was below 0.2. All of these products were below 0.2% THC.
And they had substantial CBD, so they're giving their customer what they had paid for.
Yeah, and they were removed.
So they left stuff on the shelf that basically had no CBD in it, even though it was labelled to be packed with CBD, and the stuff that genuinely had the CBD was taken off the shelves.
Put out of business.
Yeah.
And the consumers were being fooled in the process.
Yeah, but that actually isn't all, and that was bad enough, believe you me. Basically there's been a complete deconstruction of the industry so that it can be reconstructed in a different way. From then, Pamela Byrne came on the radio. She's the CEO of FSAI, and she said publicly at this time of the report that hemp was toxic and hemp caused euphoria. And this just feeds into the whole grayness of the air of it isn't actually grey. It's very, very clear hemp is a food and is
a legal food
and is protected by the Treaty of the Foundation of Europe as a food. And the efforts that were put into to demonize it or to blacken its name are ongoing, were phenomenal, to the point where in March, Minister Donnelly, sorry, not Mr. Donnelly, in March, actually it was the Minister for Enterprise, Heather Humphreys at the time, put an outright ban on hemp so that hemp products could not receive any funding from the government. The COVID-19 support was blocked for all hemp businesses. They were specifically named as a non-runner for the COVID support. The cannabis products that were medical products were going to be allowed. Synthetic CBD was going to be allowed get funding, but hemp businesses, including fiber crops, I might add, were a blanket ban. So there was also the SBCI loan fund where we were not allowed. We were also excluded from that as well. So, and in fact, as it stands today, this is still the case. We are excluded from all government funding. And as a result or as an upshot from that, I mean, what investor is going to invest into a country or an industry where the country or the governance doesn't actually permit funding itself? It doesn't promote any subsidies or promotion into the industry. It's just,
so we're going backwards since 2015 and 16.
We were until 2 weeks ago. We were going backwards, fast and furiously going backwards. 2 weeks ago, there was a court case in Belgium, and the European Court of Justice ruled that hemp is an agricultural crop. It is has no narcotic value, and it should be firmly placed back in the hands of the farmers. And there should be no prevention of trade within European countries. So it should be freely traded throughout Europe, throughout the EU.
How is that, do you think, going to impact us here in Ireland? Will there be resistance to that? Will that be just accepted? I doubt it very much, but
will it be accepted? Well, there isn't really. That wasn't the only thing actually, Finbar. Then yesterday, the UN voted to have hemp also voted in as a food. So they have affirmed the position of hemp as a food. That's the UN. So it can no longer be governed or controlled by the Control of Drugs Act here or in Europe. So really, Minister Donnelly doesn't have the power anymore to control the crop as a controlled crop. It isn't cannabis. It never was cannabis. It is firmly back in the hands of the farmers, and it is firmly a food. So from this point on, well, we would like to see that it is not a licensed crop anymore, and that at least, if not licensed, that it would be in the hands of the Department of Agriculture, where it truly belongs.
So hopefully this time next year. So you brought in the crop, what, 3-4 weeks ago now. You brought it in under a shadow, whether there was clouds in the sky or not, wondering where you're going to be next year. Things are starting to look a bit brighter. When you bring in the crops, you put out a call for volunteers. I know that when you plant the crop, you use an old traditional fiddle seed planter. It's all done as organically as possible. And it's done in a real community way where you're pulling people in, you'll grub them up, you'll give them something to drink when they're doing their work. Do you want to maintain that culture of production, or do you see yourselves becoming more industrialized as the state becomes more fluid in not harassing you in terms of your production? Or do you want to keep that more traditional way of doing things?
Well, I'm not sure about the voluntary. I mean, we've always paid.
Oh yeah.
Well, not always. At the beginning, we didn't. But whether it's in cash or whether it's a product, they get paid. Yeah. But I think what you're asking is we predominantly hand pick our crop because it's very sensitive, and yes, when we grow in scale, we would probably use some harvesting equipment, but actually the finest plants are hand-picked.
Hand-picked.
Like tea is hand-picked, like strawberries are hand-picked.
Yeah.
It's not unusual that an agricultural crop would be hand-picked. But the scale of hemp obviously is enormous compared to a field of strawberries. But going forward, we would always retain a certain quantity hand-picking.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's also, isn't there a culture and an ambiance in what you do? When I visited, I'm just trying to say it's more than just a business. There seems to be a lifestyle thing, and I was going to try to maintain that lifestyle thing as the business grows.
Well, absolutely, because it is people just when you actually have to pick the hemp yourself. There's something very, very pleasant activity about working in the field, especially when there's a group of people. We naturally thrive in the group, especially with this whole social distancing nonsense that's going on at the moment. We're social creatures, actually, and just being on the land, being under the sky, just agriculture, gardens, really, really important for people, and we've always had that in our history. Our ancestors have always lived that way. And we've become very, very isolated, actually, with our technology and our apps and our devices and our virtual world. And we see these people who have come through and who help and work with us, the effect that it has just to be in the fields for a couple of weeks.
I also think that the possibility for hemp comes from the farmer, really, and there is so much potential for so many people to become involved. Like dairying, for instance, there would be a number of cows on a small farm, and you can have a number of acres on a small farm, and the wealth, it doesn't need to be retained in the hands of a small number. It needs to be passed out. It needs to go out into the world, because we can't do it all. I mean, we can't. And we don't want to do it all. Yeah. We want it to be acceptable for us and more people to join together, to come and create an industry that's strong and firm and benefits more as opposed to
Yeah.
a few.
Yeah, because it's all about producer groups and from farm to fork and, from soil to oil or whatever it is. The more people that are involved, the better. And there's no end to the amount of hemp that could be grown. There never is enough hemp.
Yeah, just two brief questions because we're way over time. The first one you could just answer very briefly, and the second one is about if people want to find out more about hemp and want to get involved. The first question is there's a myth. People talk about hemp being as strong as steel. How strong is hemp? How replaceable? What materials can hemp replace?
Well, hemp can certainly break steel. I can tell you that for sure. Okay. We've broken loads of machinery. It's all about the right use and the context. Hemp for plastics, and in a resin you can make incredibly strong pieces of like bioplastic. So that's all there, and there's an endless world there where you could have literally hundreds of different businesses making different components for whatever it is, and that will go on for years. But on the other hand, you've got building materials, which is cheap and simple, and almost anybody could make, but it's more of a low value material. It's a building material; it needs to be cheap. So there's just endless possibilities. You could even burn it, for fuel. But it's a bit too valuable to burn at the moment because, well, we never have enough hemp. So it fits into the whole how we need more people actually involved in the land. We need more investment in agricultural infrastructure, small scale, organic. We need to look after our soils and the water and the young people. And I think cow protection culture is in there as well, and that will come. We need to stop the persecution of the land and the animals and the people. And we need to regenerate our whole society, actually. We're in serious problems at the moment. And the future's not with big tech. Big tech will always be there, but it can't take over. The future is actually with the sovereign people on the land, actually.
Well, I think that you're proving that it can be done. It's a hard battle, and the battle is probably never over, but it can be done. One final question. If anybody wants to find out more from you guys about hemp, I know you have a business, Karma Hemp. How would people get in contact?
People just can log on at karmahemp.com, and also hempirebuildingmaterials.net is there as well. So that's a source of materials. There's also the Hemp Federation of Ireland. There's a lot of information, good information out there on hemp. I'd say to anybody, if you could be there, enter as a consumer and use hemp food, and that's great. If you're a farmer, you need to study it and start slowly and develop your business, but look at long term. There is a future in hemp, and it will come. But yeah, the great future, especially for the organic farmers, to look at it as a way of creating wealth, generating wealth for themselves and for everybody, for the whole human society.
And what's your own website called, guys? It's
karmahemp.com, and we have Facebook, Karma Hemp, and Instagram.
That's K-A-M-A.
Yeah.
Karma.
And
guys,
Instagram.
Go on, Katie, you're going to say something?
I was just going to say, and an Instagram account as well, at Karma Hemp.
I don't even have Instagram. I'm not even sure what it is.
I'm not either.
Come here. In fact, some people put new apps onto my phone recently, and now when it beeps, it takes me 10 minutes to figure out which app was people. Guys, I'm delighted you came on tonight. I'd like to talk to you guys on a broader subject of our ecosystems and how we are going to hopefully start living into the future because of necessity, not because of choice, but because of necessity. But for now, guys, thanks for joining me. I know it's really late, and good luck with your projects.
Okay, thank you very much, Finbar. Okay.
Right, Mike, Kate.
Bye.
Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
Okay, that's us for tonight, folks. I want to thank all of our guests. I want to thank Jackie, Fox, Brian Dougherty, and Marcus and Kate. Next week, we should have a really interesting show as well. Get tuned in. Share this show out if you can. We need to get the word out about Coco's Law. This is an emergency. And just to remind you once again, Helen McEntee, Minister, her email address is helen.mcentee@oireachtas.ie. Be respectful, but make it clear to her the law must be called Coco's Law. Thanks to Stephen Danny, our producers in Dublin. Thanks to Stephen McDowell here in our own studio, Hawaii, and I'll talk to you guys next Thursday at 10 p.m.